So, without further preamble, October 16th, our prompt today is wild. There's a couple ways I can go with this one, but I think I want to start forcing these drawings. Forcing? Maybe cajoling these drawings into one of my long-term goals, which is to get into start producing a video, an indie video game. And I've got some of the groundwork already done. I've got a one page produced, and I've got a pretty good idea of the mechanic of the game, but I haven't put any thought so far into the aesthetic of the game, how it'll look. But I think there's going to be, well, I don't think, I know one of the big things I want to do is put a kind of have a steampunk theme to it. And so the main character, who I haven't properly named yet, but I'm just calling Steampunk Kid, mostly because he's going to have, SD proportions. And I say SD, understanding that most people will understand that as anime, and I want to stay as far away from anime as it is possible for me to stay while doing this. And the reason for that is I'm in a debate right now with a couple of artist friends of mine regarding the efficacy and usefulness of allowing art students to pursue anime style drawing. And here's the thing, I learned to draw by emulating comic book artists that I really liked. And anime is kind of the same thing. Artists see anime, they think, oh, that has an appeal to it that I would really like to have in my own drawings. And they start following the artists, they start following the studios that they really like the art style of. And it's really no different from the way anyone else got started. I mean, even in the fine art community, we saw Rembrandt or a Dali or maybe even a Picasso for some reason, and thought, that's what I want to do. That's how I want to produce art. And once an artist sees that and they have a goal in mind, they have a direction to go, they start emulating the artists whose work they admire. That's when an artist really starts to not only develop their own style, but they also start to develop their I don't want to say style there. It's when they start to develop their skills. They put down the foundation of skills, and it's the foundation of skills that goes into an original art style. When somebody looks at, any of the fine masters, you can tell who drew it, who painted it, who sculpted it, because they put a lot of effort into the way that they put a lot of effort into their foundational skills and found solutions to problems that look like their work. And you can go back to even the Greek schools of art, and there's a large part of the community at the time, the schools, where the students were required to copy the masters that they were learning from. And a lot of the artwork that remains from that period of time is all copies of copies of copies of copies. Well, I shouldn't say all of it. A lot of it, a large portion of it is, because the students were learning. So the master, the teacher, would bring out one of their sculptures, and the students would then copy it. That was their goal. And what I'm doing here is I'm trying to establish a silhouette for the character while maintaining some semblance of anatomy. And I could have gone about this another way. And in fact, I don't like the head in that position. And the reason I talk about the fine artists copying each other is a lot of artists, even when I was in art school, a lot of the artists that I was working with, products of the early 2000s and some of them even of the 90s, there was a lot of anime being introduced into the country at the time. And many of the Saturday morning cartoons that were being shown were produced in Japan, and they had that Japanimation look, that anime art style, the aesthetic. There we go. And the problem with that is when they try to copy that particular art style, they do it without an understanding of how it was reached, how it was come to in the first place. Now, when I was copying the comic book artists that I enjoyed when I was a child, I was doing it by studying, how to draw the Marvel way, and then I would go and I would copy the characters that I liked. There's a DC one out there I had to. I don't remember what it was called. But those books allowed me to develop a very, very rudimentary foundation for anatomy and how the comic book artists were addressing anatomy. And when these younger artists that I was going to school with would draw in their anime styles, I mean, it wasn't necessarily bad, but it did lack foundation. It lacked a lot of foundation. And in an art school, foundation is everything. I mean, you can't produce believable anatomy if you don't have a rudimentary foundational understanding of how a character is built, how a human being is put together. Now, once you do have that understanding, there's a lot of stretching and what's it, prodding you can do to make that into a cartoony look. But you need to have that understanding first. You know, one of the shows I really enjoyed watching, the storyline of it was very appealing, but the artwork was also appealing. And that's kind of important for me. When I'm watching a show, I gotta enjoy the artwork as well as the storyline. If it fails in one of those two areas, I usually can't stay with it for too long. But Steven Universe is a great example. Those characters are extremely deformed, have departed tremendously from human anatomy, but those characters could not have been designed without an understanding of human anatomy. I was asked by a father last week. I was at a work development and networking engagement. And the guy sitting next to me found out I was an artist and what kind of an artist I was. Or am. I am an artist. And started asking me all sorts of questions, and I kind of started to get the gist of where he was going, but then he threw a curveball at me out of the blue. He was asking for his daughter. He was interested in getting information to encourage his daughter into art. That's kind of one of the reasons a few days ago I was going into the differences between a real university and an art school. Because that was on my mind. That's been on my mind ever since. Let me get a little sharpening going on here. And that was, I gave him some advice that I wish somebody had given me. And I guess in sort of a way was given to me, I just didn't follow it. But he gave me her DeviantArt account and asked me if I could follow her. Then he offered me money to buy some of her artwork from DeviantArt. I'm going, that's something you can do yourself, You can make a DeviantArt account. It doesn't have to be your name. And buy her artwork. You don't need to bribe a stranger to do it for you. So anyway, I went onto her page, not realizing the girl is not a college-age girl. And I thought she was getting ready for college. She's 16. And I followed her artwork. I followed her page. But the girl has very little understanding of anatomy, which is all right. She's getting away with it right now because she's mostly drawing monsters. Monsters and creatures. And she has no art foundation into the anatomy of the creatures at all. And so they end up looking very childish, amateur. And I mean, she's 16. Of course she's an amateur. She's just starting out on the path, learning how to be an artist. There's a lot to learn. And when you're just starting out, the best thing you can do, and I get where the dad's coming from, the best thing you can do is find a mentor who can encourage and enrich those skills, which this girl never had done. She hadn't sought out any kind of instruction, not even a book. Pardon me. And by the way, when I got to her page, she's not even selling her artwork, so that became a moot point really quick. But I kind of told him the same thing I've been telling you guys. Like I said, it's been on my mind for the last week since it happened. And I'm trying to design this character as a video game, so I'm getting distracted from thinking more along the lines of silhouette and trying to draw hair, which isn't the goal for this yet. That'll come once I establish the silhouette. But one of the things the girl did is that a word? Sure. One of the things I noticed the girl did have was a good eye for silhouette. So even though her monsters, they're drawn kind of a chibi way, they did have very unique silhouettes. You could put all of her monsters together, kind of like Pokemon. Yeah, think of the Pokédex. You could put all of the Pokemon in a row and tell which one's which just by their silhouette. And her monsters are the same way. She can put all of her monsters together in a chart, and only showing the silhouettes can be able to tell them apart. Now here's something I've struggled with this character. As I said, I haven't properly named him. I'm just calling him Steampunk Kid. I can't decide if Steampunk Kid should have a taller top hat or a cowboy hat, kind of a truncated stovepipe like this, like Little Joe had, Little Joe hat. Maybe he'll have like a Little Joe hat. I like that. He's got a giant head. I could put a Haas hat on him. There we go. And ellipses, you see me drawing these ellipses, that's one of those foundational skills that I'm talking about. When artists are learning to draw, they don't put enough effort. A lot of times, in college, and especially when attending an art school, you come across artists a lot that can't draw a circle, can't draw ellipses, because they've never put the work into it. And this girl was the same way here. She had never put the work into I think I like that better. Into learning how to draw the fundamental shapes, and so her characters are, I mean, they look more like Play-Doh creations than drawings. Even though the silhouettes are good, there's absolutely no foundation there. I'll have to do a whole page of this guy's face eventually to really nail down the proportions, and facial features and expressions. But again, remember, this guy, when he's on screen, he's going to be like that big. So there doesn't need to be a whole lot of detail put in it right now at this stage. I'm just kind of drawing an idea to help me figure out what he's going to look like at that height. Have to look at my shirt to remember left over right. And I think he's going to have a Wild West style vest, because vests are cool. And I think he's more of a working man, so he's going to have his undershirt right under his vest. He's going to have that sleeve rolled up, because he's getting ready to work, and dress shirts just aren't ready for steam work. He's a steampunk kid. Here we go. He's going to have those ugly Victorian style pants. And I think he's going to have like knee-high patent leather boots, because he's got to crawl around all sorts of machinery and needs to protect his tootsies. And maybe he should have big old gloves on too. Big old work gloves. And see, even though I'm deforming some features further now, I'm thinking in terms of silhouette. I'm also using the foundation that I drew down for those features. So I'm going to enlarge this hand, because he's, it's going to represent wearing big old gloves. And when I color this in, these gloves are going to be like a light tan, like a raw suede leather. And I'm only going to represent the three fingers here, because we are going cartoony. We're looking more for silhouette, and like I said, when he's small, it's going to be really hard to get four fingers in there. He's going to be determined. What are we working on right now? And I didn't pose him really well just because, like I was saying, I'm working on the silhouette of a character that I haven't fully designed yet. But I think one of the things he's going to be facing a lot of is this wild ether. And part of the story I developed in my one page is that obviously steampunk and ether traditionally go together well, but Steampunk Kid was trying to avert a disaster. The machine was overloading, the professor was nowhere to be seen, and he was unable to stop the machine from overloading and producing a disastrous explosion of ether, and it's starting to crawl all over everything and consuming the world. So he's got to go through and he's got to collect all these bits of ether. Am I even on my page there? Yeah, I'm good. Had a camera mishap yesterday and ended up spending half the time drawing off the camera. It was zoomed in one step. So the mechanic of the game that I'm wanting to develop is it'll be a platformer. Just a simple little platformer. But the story is going to be, has to go around and collect the bits of ether. He has to find the containment vessels, rather the elements of the containment vessels, and using those containment vessels, go and collect the ether, only the ether has consumed a lot of the environment, so many of the obstacles that he will face are free wild ether and bonded ether monsters. So I'm thinking like stage levels and monster levels. I'm actually thinking along the lines, if you're familiar with Mega Man. I honestly I'm going to be copying Mega Man as far as the gameplay goes. I don't think I'm going to go full 8-bit sprite style on it. I'll probably go very smooth CG rendering on it, because that's what I'm more familiar with. That's what I can do. I don't have any experience making sprites. Never made Sprite, but I have made Mountain Dew. I'm sorry, that sounded like a left field thought to most of you, I'm sure. There we go. And I think we need more more wild ether up here. We can't just have a little bit of, we've got to put some giant wild ether here in the background that's kind of looming distantly. There we go. Let's figure out some form and shadow with the ink then. Doing it a little bit differently. I do it a little bit differently each time because I am exploring different techniques of inking. And this time you can see I didn't put any shading or shadowing down. I simply created outlines. Let's go straight into the inking. And I'm going to start with my good old Statler 0.5. It looks good. It felt like it was going dry yesterday. Started talking about why artists who draw anime are typically hurting themselves. You know, you get into these stories all the time of art teachers hated my artwork because it wasn't what they wanted me to draw. And when I look at the artwork of artists who are making those claims, I can absolutely 100% see where their teacher was coming from. Because those artists typically have a lot of potential and no foundation. And it's hard to see when you're the person involved, when you are that individual. It's kind of difficult to understand that the problem is that as an artist, they focused so much on copying another artist's work that they have failed to understand it. There we go. And I gave this little guy too much of a chin there. We want to keep him just a little bit on the chibi side, just a touch. And I've seen artists who are very good at representing characters that they enjoy in a variety of different anime styles. But if they were asked to draw let's say something ridiculous like Darkwing Duck. There's a strong cartoony style that is actually very closely related to the anime art style and art aesthetic, but they are completely incapable of reproducing that style of art. that kind of artwork. Okay, so you can't draw that. Why not draw Darkwing Duck as your anime, in your anime style? And even there they fail, because they have failed to understand the foundational requirements of drawing a character. And yes, I do understand. I had teachers who hated anime style so much that even drawing something that resembled Disney characters were looked down upon and graded poorly as a result. But when you're in an art school and you're doing an assignment, it's just like when you're in a professional environment and you're doing an assignment. You can either do the assignment that your boss or the client has asked of you, or you can't. If you can't, you don't get paid. And as a professional, when you're working on contract work, and artists are mostly going to be doing contract work, even the guys who work at Disney or Nickelodeon or what's the other guy? DreamWorks. Wow, I had a hard time pulling that one out. Those guys have really good, really cushy jobs right now. But as soon as their project is over, they either renew their contract or go find a new contract, because they are contracted employees. And if they can't produce work that their supervisor or technical director or what have you has asked of them, those guys aren't going to get their contract renewed. And it's a very small community. So all of the other studios have people who have friends that work at all the other studios. And if you gain a bad reputation because you think your character that you're drawing, that is not your character, it's somebody else's character. And when you're working in a studio, you will always be drawing somebody else's character. And you think it has to be drawn this way because that's what you like, you're not going to get your contract renewed. In fact, you may not be there to the end of your contract in the first place. And it's hard to explain that to a 16-year-old who is just getting out onto the battlefield of art for the first time, finding that they enjoy it, and they're doing the same thing over and over again. And I want to just pull out my hair and say, you have so much potential, but you keep drawing this dreck. Because at the same time, I want to see them expand, and this person is the same way. I want to see her do more. I want to see them produce more better work and expand their skills and increase their capabilities. But at the same time, I don't want to be the monster that is stomping their puppies on the curb. That's totally a saying, right? So, yeah, it gets into that kind of dilemma there where I can either be the monster that they hate or the monster that tells them the truth. You know, this is an interesting thought. If I'm creating this character as a steampunk style, steampunk is typically, if I haven't missed my time period, and I frequently do, I have a hard enough time remembering people's names and did not do well in fine art for very much the same reason, art history, for very much the same reason. But much of steampunk is represented by the Edwardian style, Edwardian era, which is late 1800s, like late 1880s, even 1890s, up through as late as 1910, like right before World War I. And the style didn't change very much at that time, but one of the things that just struck me as I was cross-hatching this is it would be interesting to design a character that could look like a lithopane. I'm going to have to experiment with that. I don't know how I would do that in 3D. I would have to make a very, for me, I'm sure there's people out there who have done it and could very easily reproduce the materials or shaders. But for me, I've never done anything like that. It would be an interesting exercise to figure out. And I'm thinking, for the sake of the size of the character involved, he's just going to have black hair. I was going to give him some brown hair, mousy brown hair, so he could look like a typical street urchin kid. But I think I'm going to give him a better starting ground. Mostly for the sake of the exploration of this silhouette, which I am very much enjoying for this character. It's bringing out some thoughts and ideas that I could do with the character that would work out really well for the story. So he would have to have some very visible features from a small, maybe not a shadow under his nose. That looks a little, just a touch Hitlery. There we go. How are we doing on time? We are 45 minutes in. So we're not doing too bad. This will probably end up being one of my shorter days again. I need to start actually doing longer periods of drawing. I'm thoroughly enjoying having my hand back, y'all. You have no idea. I've talked about it before, but you guys have no idea how great it is to have my hand back. And I need to start doing longer drawings. Once Inktober wraps up, I might continue doing these daily drawings as a way of motivating myself to do more illustrative work. And maybe even as I develop this particular video game idea. And as I said, it's not going to be anything groundbreaking as far as the play style goes. I'm definitely going to have elements of other video games in there because you can't be influenced from one source. Well, I don't know. Maybe you can. I can't. I could make it a direct Mega Man ripoff. And that wouldn't be too bad. And I'm talking about the old school NES Mega Man, not that junk X series that came out for the Super Nintendo. I mean the good ones. I don't know if y'all can hear that or not, but that's my cat trying to convince me that he needs to be fed again. There we go. Back a few years ago when my hand problems first started getting really bad, I was doing some illustrations and was never able to finish them just because I couldn't hold a pencil for more than... At the time it was so bad I couldn't hold the pencil for more than 10 minutes without completely exhausting my hand and being absolutely incapable of holding anything for the next 2 days. And it was very frustrating. And for anyone who's newer to my stream or my channel, the short version of the story is I was having some hand problems and the doctor told me it was arthritis. And I would just have to accept that it was only ever going to get worse. So I was on a regular regimen of ibuprofen and different pain management pills, all over the counter stuff. It wasn't anything prescription based. It was all just over the counter stuff because it's just basic arthritis. It wasn't anything too remarkable. And the doctor just, I should have known it at the time, diagnosed me before I got into the office, but he had no sympathy for my plight. And a few years later, I was having a different problem with a different joint in my hip. I was having problems working. And I went to go see a chiropractor because I didn't trust my doctor anymore. And the chiropractor just basically said, "Oh yeah, that's a simple problem. Let me fix this for you." And I mean, it was rehab. It was rehabilitation. I had to do exercises and go in weekly for the first 3 or 4 months. But he fixed my hip. Because it wasn't an arthritis problem, it was a muscle spasm problem from an old injury that I had never looked at. I had never gotten properly fixed because I was told, that it was arthritis. When all I really needed to do was some very simple exercises and regular stretching, to get the muscles to relax enough to heal properly. And after that success, I went to go see him about my hand, and sure enough, he said I was having the same problem in my arm. It wasn't even my hand. I was feeling it up here and back here. And it was to the point where I couldn't, this motion here, this pinching motion, was impossible. I could not touch my thumb and finger together. It was so bad. I had gotten used to working this way, and I'd gotten used to doing things left-handed. And the doctor made me cry like a baby, but stretched out that muscle, gave me another handful of exercises to do. I lost my circle. And there we go. And just a couple of weeks later, had my hand sorted out. And that was earlier this year. But because I hadn't been drawing for a very long time, I hadn't been doing regular illustration work, I had no endurance in my hand. I had lost all of my endurance, lost my muscle memory. So I've kind of been not really learning over again, but remembering a lot of things. So one of the reasons I really wanted to get into doing this Inktober exercise was it was a good motivation to get myself doing it every day and relearning a lot of the things that I had been forgetting. My poor cat, the guy was almost dead 2 months ago. Scared the absolute junk out of me. Couldn't eat, couldn't even hold his head up out of his water bowl. He was just literally dying in front of me. And I took him to the vet, and he had diabetes. Oh, fart, I just ruined that pen. I missed the cap. Jammed the brush tip right into my finger. I think I ruined it. Oh, boy. It's like running down my finger. Jeez. A lot of ink came out of that. Anyway, got him on insulin, changed his diet, and he's back to full health again. I was mostly worried because the guy is 15 years old. He's been with me for a long time. And being a realist, I was ready to believe that it was just his time and wasn't really prepared for it. But fortunately, didn't have to explore that too far. Got him the insulin prescription he needed, and like I said, he's been doing really well. I wanted to do some weird highlights on these globular sections just to give them a little bit of a light source. Help bring out a little bit of texture. I've drawn them mostly smooth, but I'm thinking of them as a flowing liquid. See? No muscle memory. Now I'm thinking of 3D shapes and where along, if I've got a highlight here, I'd probably get one along these strands somewhere. And more of a specular highlight than a shadow, so it won't travel too far. That'll work for now. Maybe I shouldn't abuse my brush tip by using it to fill in the black. In fact, do I have anything else? I don't believe I do. Yeah. All my Sharpies made it to my workshop area where I've been working on another project. I was telling you the story about the dad who had me look at his daughter's work. And he pulled it up on his phone so I could see it. And, well, what do you think of this? And I was going, that's very, and I was trying to find a very polite way to say immature. And wasn't willing to say it to his face. He hadn't told me that it was his daughter's work, but, from context, I was kind of guessing anyway. And he goes, immature, right? Oh, thank goodness, yes. So, I think I just spread that ink all over my face. Oh, gross. Yeah, it is. It's there. Wonderful. Well, then the conversation went into trying to get me to buy some of his daughter's work, and she doesn't have any of it for sale through DeviantArt, so I did not pursue it, and I pointed that out to him so he'd let the subject drop. But he's trying to encourage his daughter into turning art into a business and treating art like a business. And if she has an interest in it, honestly, that's what she should be doing, is treating it like a business. Which is very close to some advice I was given at a young age, but was not the advice that I was given. The advice I was given was go to school for business and get a minor in art. And I was so full of myself, my first immediate thought after hearing that was, well, I'm going to be working for Disney. I'm not going to need a business degree. Well, let me tell you something. You ain't going to be working for Disney. If you think of art like the NFL, Disney always gets the first draft picks from all their favorite schools. And they fill that draft up so fast with extremely dedicated, skilled, talented artists. And I hate using the word talented, but that's really what they're looking for. That unless you have something that absolutely stands out in a completely remarkable and unique way, you're not going to be working at Disney. And to illustrate that, I have a story. I have a lot of stories. So I served my mission for my church in Southern California. The mission was called the Arcadia, California Mission. It was called the California Arcadia Mission because they always say things backwards, and I don't know why. But Arcadia is just outside of Anaheim. And one of the areas that I served in was so close to Anaheim that we could go up to a park bench that was less than a block from our apartment, my flatmates and I. And we'd sit out on the park bench and we'd watch the nightly fireworks at Disneyland. Couldn't see Disneyland proper, but the fireworks peeked up over the hill and we could definitely see them. So that was a lot of fun. But that's just how close to Disneyland we were. And remember, Disneyland is a theme park, but there's also a fully functioning studio out of that place. And one of the high school kids in our church group was pursuing a career in art, and one of the mucky mucks from the Disney studio had happened to come across his artwork. And what this kid had done is he had spent a good solid year building up an animator's portfolio. He wanted to be a 2D animator. And he was a senior in high school, so he started this when he was a junior. And he wasn't a remarkable student, so he was at the same grade level as everybody else his age. He wasn't remarkable in any other way, except that he had dedicated the time to learn how Disney Studios produces 2D artwork. And he dedicated the time to learning those skills. And it's one of the reasons why I'm kind of down on the term talent. Because people use talent to mean something innate that they can do by nature of who or what they are. And I don't think anything is really a result of talent in that respect. But rather, talent is a result of enough interest to develop the skill. And that's what this kid did. He developed the skill. So when that Disney exec had come by and seen, I don't know if he was an exec, I just like saying the word, and seen his portfolio, he was asked to do an entry exam, the same entry exam they give to all of their animators. And what it was is it was a couple of plates. He was given a few plates that are basically just a sheet of paper with a character on it, and asked to reproduce the character. And because he was prepared, he had prepared himself to be able to draw like Disney animators, he was able to reproduce the drawings in relatively short order with a very high level of precision. And then he was given another one of the tests, I believe, was he was given two cells of an animation and asked to draw an in-between. And he had never done an in-between before. He had learned how to draw, but he'd never learned how to animate. So, and that was why I had become aware of him. Because the members of the ward, the church congregation that I was a member of out there, knew that I was an artist, knew that I had done some animation. I had learned Flash at the time. I hadn't really learned a lot of 2D cell animation, but I knew the terminology. And so they asked for my help trying to figure out what some of these things meant, and I helped them out. And I was just looking at, he had his floor full of drawings of Mickey Mouse doing different things. That was part of his test, was drawing Mickey Mouse doing different things. And they were incredible drawings. They looked extremely professional. And when most people think of cartoons, they don't think of extremely professional artwork. But they really are. They are a high-level skill, a high-level art. And unfortunately, it's only truly appreciated overseas, and not so much here in America, where cartoons are considered, with very few exceptions, the domain of children. And anyone who watches cartoons is innately immature. And if you happen to be one of those people who watches King of the Hill or The Simpsons or Family Guy, well, just don't talk about it around your friends, because those are shows, those are primetime shows. They're made for adult audiences, but they're cartoons, and you don't talk about watching cartoons. Whereas in Japan, for example, and I believe Korea has a similar view, a lot of animation comes out of Korea, where there are primetime shows that are animated. And they're 3D animated, and they're 2D cell animated, and the studios that produce those animations are just absolutely incredible. And they can command the attention of incredible artists through their reputations. And even the crummy studios, the crummiest studios out there, still command a reputation among artists where they want to work there to develop their skills to get into the better studios, because that's how you develop a career. And it's not looked on with any kind of stigmatism out there. It's only looked on with any kind of stigmatism here in America. And it's silly. But when I was looking at that kid's artwork and just absolutely amazed at how professional his work looked, I knew right away that the individual from Disney was going to offer him something incredible, and they did. They offered him a high school summer internship, which they have like 6 of them a year that they do. And usually those internships lead to things like enrollment in the California Institute of the Arts, or the California Art Institute. I can never remember what it's called. The one that everybody from Pixar went to. Disney loves hiring from that institution. And there's a couple of art institutions around the country that Disney will hire from. Just straight up, if you go to that school, you have a really good chance of working at Disney or Pixar. And that's one of the schools. And that's usually how their internships worked. But he was offered a job right out the gate as soon as his internship was over. I don't know if he ever went to the school or not. Kind of hope that he did, but the kid didn't really need it. There needed to be another glob back here. We're at an hour and 15 minutes. I apologize. I thought I was going to be done by now. Yeah. I'll probably take one of these Inktober days and just, like I said, draw a page of faces of Steampunk Kid. And I'll probably get the help of anybody watching who cares to give the character a name. I've been reading about publishing games on Steam and mobile publishing and various other ways of getting indie games out there. Not sure which way I'm going to go yet. I'm not too worried about making a profit if I do end up successfully publishing the game. It's mostly a way for me to build out my portfolio, get my foot in the door, and kind of hope that any video game companies that are hiring environmental artists aren't watching these videos, because I'm kind of going through these drawings really quickly and very simplifying them down rather than doing anything highly complicated. This is going to take a long time to do. Mostly because the stream, I'm worried about the time that I'm taking on the stream to do these drawings. And I'm trying to keep these drawings under an hour. But that doesn't always work. I should just do a stream where I spend pretty much the whole day just marathoning a major drawing. But again, I haven't sat down and drawn like that in a few years because of the issues that I've had with my hand. Now that I'm more confident with my ability to hold a pencil again, I may just have to go and do that. This whole month of October, I've been drawing an hour or 2 hours every single day, and it's way, way more than I have in years because of that issue with my hand. And I haven't had too many problems. I have had a little bit of cramping and stiffness in the evenings, but I've got the exercises that my chiropractor gave me to work those out, and I haven't had any issues since starting that have prevented me from drawing. So I think the next step is just drawing more. Definitely need to get my website up. There's currently no way for anyone to contact me if on the off chance that somebody sees my art, sees my drawings, and wants to contract me or collab with me or anything. There's just no way that's going to happen. But with a website, I would be able to at least have one way of people having an ability to contact me. And, you know, contract illustrations are always a good thing to have material to stream. I wish I was using my inkwell and brush. I haven't had one for years. Not being able to use my art supplies has resulted in a lot of my art supplies completely drying up and being unusable. And hopefully I can get outside today and do some airbrushing. I've got these lawn ornaments that I've been making that just need a little bit of airbrushing and they'll be done. And I was all set up to do it yesterday and they needed some touch-up work. Oh, it's overcast outside. It probably is going to rain. Just needed a little bit of touch-up work and then the airbrushing. And as I started doing the touch-up work, I started seeing more and more problems with one of them. So I had to mask off huge sections, and masking is always time-consuming. And it wasn't that the masking itself was terribly overcomplicated. It's just that it took long enough that by the time I got my airbrush out and got set up, I was able to finish one ornament before the rain came. And I wasn't expecting rain. Excuse me. But it was blowing just enough that I couldn't set up I've got a little half tent thing that I use occasionally for shade while I'm airbrushing outside. But it also helps keep the rain off, but it was blowing too much. I couldn't set the thing up. Some wild ether and the steampunk kid. Probably end up giving him something that looks like a Ghostbuster proton pack, you know, steampunk style, that he'll use to vacuum up the the wild, we'll call it wild ether. And one of the reasons I called the character Steampunk Kid was when I wrote the one page, I was originally putting these concepts together into a one-page document. I kept rewriting it. I realized one of the things I wanted to do is not necessarily have a male protagonist. There's absolutely no reason not to have a female protagonist if somebody would rather play a female steampunk kid. And I realized that pretty early on, before I ever got to a stage where I was going to name the character. And because of that realization, I just never named the character. And I probably will eventually. I have a couple of ideas for how that would work. And it would just be a simple, very, very simple character selection screen. And it can go from very simple, the idea is very fluid right now. It can go from a very simple character selection screen to a much more complicated character selection screen pretty easily, depending on how carried away I'd want to get on the character selection. And one of the reasons for that, I've mentioned before, I'm a D&D nerd, and I really like the idea of adding classes to any game I imagine. So rather than having races, I could just have, the boy or the girl, and then have different jobs available that the player can select from for their boy or their girl, with a variety of advantages or disadvantages for each class, and maybe even a different selection of costume and tools depending on the class. And that might come later. I would really like to just develop the game and get it out, and then have those kind of features added in a later update. Now I'm imagining the gameplay right now. And for some reason my mind got stuck on the idea of running around with a vacuum on his back, sucking up ether creatures. And of course my mind went straight to Luigi's Mansion when I started thinking about that. I think that's kind of more 3D than I would really like to go. While I'm currently thinking of the characters as 3D assets and the environments as fully rendered 3D environments, I think the camera is still going to work like a 2D camera. And the gameplay is going to be much more similar to 8-bit platformer like Mega Man. And the reason I say Mega Man is because A, that is my favorite platformer of all time, and B, I liked the ability that Mega Man had to switch his main weapon depending on the monsters he had defeated. And that was one of the mechanics I wanted to include in this game, but may not end up doing that just because it's a concept that I don't think quite works with the world. If I have wild ether rolling through the world and attaching itself to living creatures and turning them into ether monsters, then where does the technology come from that Steampunk Kid would use to change up his main weapon? Woohoo, getting there, almost done. These bubbles are getting tedious. When I start doing this as a 3D game, these bubbles will be less tedious because I can just do them as a material and apply it. There we go. I'd like to get a more mobile camera going as well, so I can do videos of my other projects. Some of my viewers don't know this about me, because most of my viewers are people I know personally. My channel is so small still. But even a lot of those people don't know this about me. But I am a maker. I make the things. So, yeah, when I started the YouTube channel, I was going to do a lot of makering, and then I never really did. Some of these little details would never make it into the final game design. Alright, I think a few cross hatches and we can call it a day. His beat up gloves are trashed from all the work that he does. One of my favorite webcomics is Girl Genius Online. And that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to include a female protagonist as a playable game character. But I find myself adding elements of some of the male characters from Girl Genius Online into my Steampunk Kid here. Every time I draw him anew, I add something else from one of the male protagonists there. Alright, there we go. Very simple drawing of Steampunk Kid encountering wild ether. Thank you for joining me for this episode of RamDragon Studio, and thanks for listening to me rant for, what, an hour and a half now? Man, you guys are sadists. Are you? Are you sadists? I can't even remember which one is which. Anyway. You guys must enjoy the torture. Whichever word that is. Thanks again, and I'll see you tomorrow.